The billionaire pretended to be blind. Then the maid's toddler held his hand and whispered 3 words. Hey, stop scrolling for a second. I need you to hear this one till the very end, because I promise you, you have never heard a story like this before. A billionaire, the most powerful man in the city, pretended to be blind. Not for a game. Not for fun. For a reason so painful, so shocking, that even his own family didn't know the truth. He hired a maid. A simple, humble woman with a 3-year-old daughter. He thought no one would ever see through his lie. He thought he was in control. But then, one quiet afternoon, that tiny toddler walked up to him, took his hand in her small fingers, and whispered 3 words. 3 words that shattered everything he thought he knew about his own life. Stay with me, because what happens next will break your heart. And then heal it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, I just want to say, wherever you're watching this from, drop it in the comments. I love seeing how many countries and cities you guys are tuning in from every single day. And if you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button because we bring you stories like this, real, raw, emotional stories, every single week. Alright, let's get into it. This is, The Billionaire Pretended to be Blind. Nobody becomes the most feared man in the business world by accident. Adrian Cole was 34 years old. And by the time most men his age were still climbing the ladder, he was already standing at the very top of it, looking down. He owned 4 companies, 2 private jets, a penthouse that touched the clouds over the city, and a name that made grown executives sweat in boardrooms. People called him cold, ruthless, untouchable. But 3 months ago, Adrian Cole had done something no one, not his board of directors, not his lawyers, not even his own mother, could explain. He had told the entire world he was blind. It started with a car accident. Real one. His driver had lost control on a rain-soaked highway, and the car had flipped twice before slamming into a guardrail. Adrian survived with nothing but a mild concussion and a few cuts. The doctors confirmed his vision was perfectly fine within 48 hours. But Adrian never told anyone that. Instead, he wore dark glasses. He let his assistant guide him by the elbow through hallways he knew better than his own heartbeat. He memorized the number of steps to his office door. He learned to listen for people instead of looking at them. He became, in the eyes of the entire world, a broken man who had lost his sight in a tragic accident. Why would a billionaire fake blindness? The answer was buried so deep inside him that even he sometimes forgot it during the day, only for it to crash back into him at night, when the penthouse was silent and the city lights blurred outside his window like something behind frosted glass. 6 months before the accident, Adrian had been engaged to a woman named Melissa Grant. 30 years old, stunning, sharp-tongued, and, as Adrian had discovered by pure accident one evening when her phone lit up on the kitchen counter, dating him only for what came after the wedding. He had heard her voice, low and laughing, on a call with her sister. Once the ring's on my finger and his name's on the accounts, none of this matters, she'd said. He's an ATM machine with a nice suit. Adrian had stood frozen in his own kitchen, holding 2 cups of coffee, listening to the woman he loved reduce him to a number. He didn't confront her. Not that night. Instead, something cold and calculating had clicked into place inside him, the same instinct that had built his empire. He needed to know who around him was real. His employees. His so-called friends. Even Melissa. He needed proof, undeniable proof, of who genuinely cared about Adrian Cole the man, and who only cared about Adrian Cole the fortune. The accident, 3 weeks later, had handed him the perfect disguise. Blind men are invisible in a strange way. People stop performing for them. They forget to lower their voices. They think a man who cannot see cannot possibly see who they really are. Adrian used it like a weapon. He watched Melissa's visits become shorter. He listened to her sighs when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Her complaints to her friends about being stuck, playing nurse to a man who used to take her to Paris on weekends. He listened to two of his oldest friends discreetly ask his lawyer about the terms of his will, just out of concern, of course. And through it all, Adrian smiled softly, nodded, and let them believe he saw nothing. But there was one problem he hadn't planned for. His housekeeper of 11 years had recently retired to care for her ailing husband, and in her place came a woman named Sarah Bennett, 28 years old, quiet, dressed in a plain gray uniform, with tired eyes that still, somehow, held warmth in them. She came with a reference letter, a work history full of gaps, and a 3-year-old daughter named Lily, who she couldn't afford to leave with anyone else. Adrian's assistant had hesitated to hire her. "She has a toddler, sir. It might be complicated for a household like this." But Adrian, playing the role of a broken, humbled blind man, had waved a hand and said the words that would quietly change his life forever. "Let the child come. I don't need silence. I need someone who won't lie to me." He had no idea in that moment just how true those words would become. Sarah Bennett's first week in the Cole penthouse was the hardest of her life, and she had lived through some very hard weeks. She arrived each morning at 6, her daughter Lily's small hand wrapped around 2 of her fingers, a worn diaper bag slung over one shoulder, and a fear sitting heavy in her chest that she tried desperately to hide. She needed this job. She needed it the way a drowning person needs air. 8 months ago, Sarah's husband had walked out. Not gradually, not with warning, but suddenly in the middle of the night, leaving behind a note that said he wasn't built for this kind of life, and a bank account with $11 in it. Sarah had gone from a woman who once dreamed of finishing her nursing degree to a woman scrubbing floors and folding another family's laundry just to keep formula in the fridge and a roof, any roof, over her daughter's head. She had heard the rumors about Mr. Cole before she ever met him. The cold billionaire. The man who fired people over typos. The man who, after some terrible accident, had gone blind and now lived like a ghost in his own glass tower. She expected arrogance. She expected impatience. What she found instead confused her. Adrian Cole was quiet. Painfully, achingly quiet, in a way that didn't match the stories she'd heard. He sat by the window for hours, his sunglasses catching the light, his hands folded in his lap like a man waiting for something he couldn't name. He never once raised his voice at her, not even the day Lily knocked over a glass vase in the hallway and it shattered into 100 pieces. "It's all right," he had said, so gently that Sarah's throat had tightened with something she refused to call sympathy. "Vases can be replaced. Little girls' feelings can't." Sarah had knelt down right there, sweeping up glass with trembling hands, apologizing over and over, terrified he would fire her on the spot. But he simply asked in that same low, careful voice, "What's her name?" "Lily," Sarah had whispered. "She's 3. "Lily," Adrian repeated, as if testing the word, tasting it. "That's a good name." From that day on, something shifted slowly, cautiously, like ice thawing in a place no one thought could ever warm again. Lily, being 3 years old and blissfully unaware of billionaires or business empires or broken engagements, did not understand that Mr. Cole was supposed to be scary. She did not understand that grown-ups were supposed to whisper and tiptoe around him. All she understood was that there was a tall man who sat very still by the window, and that he had a kind voice, and that sometimes when her mother wasn't looking, he smiled at her like she was the only good thing in a very long day. Within 2 weeks, Lily had taken to wandering into the sitting room while Sarah worked in the kitchen, climbing up onto the couch beside Adrian, and simply talking to him. About her stuffed rabbit. About the puddle she'd jumped in that morning. About the moon, which she was convinced followed their car home every single night. Adrian never once had the heart to tell Sarah to keep her daughter away. In fact, he found himself waiting for the soft patter of small feet each afternoon, the way some men wait for good news. But behind the sunglasses, behind the careful stillness, Adrian Cole was still running his experiment, still watching, still measuring who around him was real. He noticed, with a strange twist in his chest, that Sarah Bennet never once asked him for anything beyond her wage. She never lingered near his study where the safe was kept. She never asked about his will, his money, his companies. She simply worked, hard, tired, silent work, and went home each evening to a small apartment across town that Adrian had quietly investigated, only to find it was barely heated in the winter. Meanwhile, Melissa's visits had grown even shorter, colder. On one particular evening, she arrived only to complain that the blind act, her actual words, hissed to her sister over the phone in the hallway, unaware Adrian could hear every syllable through the cracked door, was getting old, and she didn't sign up to be someone's caretaker forever. Adrian had sat in his chair long after she left that night, sunglasses in his lap, actually staring, for the first time in months, at the city lights below, feeling something inside his chest crack quietly down the middle. It was Lily who found him there an hour later, having toddled out of the guest room where she and Sarah stayed some nights when Sarah worked late shifts. She climbed up onto the couch in her little pajamas, patted his hand with her small palm, and said the thing 3-year-olds say without any understanding of the weight behind it. "Why sad, Mr. Adrian?" And Adrian, who had not cried once since the day of the accident, who had built walls so high around his heart that even he had forgotten what was behind them, felt his eyes burn behind the dark glasses he didn't need. "I'm not sad, sweetheart," he lied. "I'm just tired." Lily studied him with the terrifying honesty only small children possess. "You're not blind," she said simply. "I see you looking at me." Adrian's entire body went still. For 3 full seconds, Adrian Cole forgot how to breathe. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily, entirely unbothered, was already reaching for the small stuffed rabbit she'd left on the couch cushion. "You looked at me," she repeated matter of fact, the way children state truths adults spend their whole lives avoiding. "When I fall down. You looked right at me first, then you closed your eyes." Adrian's mind raced back. 2 days earlier, Lily had tripped over the edge of the rug in the hallway, and in the split second before she hit the floor, his instincts, sharper and faster than his careful performance, had made him turn his head and track her fall with his eyes before he caught himself and blinked them shut, reaching out blindly to steady her. He had thought no one noticed. He had forgotten that children notice everything. "Lily," he said carefully, kneeling now so he was eye level with her, his heart hammering in a way it hadn't in years, not during hostile takeovers, not during board meetings where millions of dollars hung in the balance. "Can you keep a secret? A very important secret, just between you and me?" Lily nodded solemnly, the way children do when they're handed responsibility far beyond their years. "I'm not really blind," Adrian admitted, the words feeling foreign and terrifying in his mouth, the first time he had said them aloud to another living soul. "But I need people to think I am. Just for a little while longer. Can you do that for me?" Lily considered this with the gravity of a tiny philosopher. "Is it a game?" "Sort of," Adrian said softly. "A very important game." "Okay," Lily said satisfied, and went back to her rabbit as if the conversation had been about nothing more important than the color of the sky. But Adrian sat frozen on that couch long after she'd wandered off, his mind spinning. A 3-year-old had seen through months of careful performance in seconds, simply because she was too young to know how to look away from the truth. Terrified him. It also, in some strange way he couldn't yet name, felt like the first honest moment he'd had in half a year. That night, unable to sleep, Adrian did something he hadn't done since the accident. He took off the sunglasses entirely, alone in his room, and really looked, at his own reflection in the dark window. A 34-year-old man who had built an empire out of steel and ambition, who now sat in the dark pretending to be broken, testing the loyalty of people around him like lab rats in a maze of his own making. "What have I become?" he thought. The answer came 2 days later, and it came from an unexpected direction. Adrian's lawyer, a sharp, silver-haired man named Richard Voss who had handled the Cole family's affairs for over 20 years, requested an urgent private meeting. Sarah had been asked to keep Lily in the kitchen during the appointment, but the child, restless and curious as 3-year-olds are, wandered close enough to the study door to hear fragments of the conversation drifting out. Fragments she wouldn't understand, but would, in her innocent way, repeat later exactly as she'd heard them. Inside the study, Richard Voss's voice was grim. "Adrian, I need to tell you something you're not going to want to hear. Melissa's been in contact with an estate attorney. Not mine, hers. She's been asking questions, specifically about what happens to your assets in the event you're declared incapacitated. There's a clause being drafted, Adrian. A power of attorney, contingent on your condition worsening. She's building a legal case to have herself named your primary decision-maker. Financially, medically, everything." The room went silent except for the low hum of the city outside. "She's trying to take control of everything," Adrian said slowly, "using my own lie against me." "She doesn't know it's a lie," Richard said carefully. "As far as she and the rest of the world know, you are genuinely blind, genuinely vulnerable, and she is simply securing her future as your fiancé. Legally, if she moves fast enough and you don't contest it, she could gain significant control before you'd even realize what happened." Adrian sat back slowly in his chair, the full weight of his own trap closing in around him. He had built this cage to test the world's honesty, and now the very woman he'd been testing was about to use his own deception to steal everything he'd built. "There's something else," Richard added, hesitating in a way that made Adrian's stomach turn cold. "The housekeeper, Sarah Bennett. I ran a standard background check when she was hired, as we do with all new staff with access to the residence. And..." Richard slid a folder across the desk, forgetting for a moment that Adrian was supposed to be unable to see it. Adrian caught himself just in time, letting his fingers find the folder's edge instead of his eyes. "Read it to me," Adrian said quietly. And what Richard Voss read aloud in the next 60 seconds would change absolutely everything Adrian Cole believed about the woman scrubbing his floors, and the little girl who had just seen straight through the biggest lie of his life. "Sarah Bennett," Richard read, his voice measured but his eyes flicking up occasionally to gauge Adrian's reaction. Maiden name Sarah Whitfield. Age 28. Former nursing student at Lindenwood University. Withdrew in her final semester. He paused. "Adrian. Her father is Marcus Whitfield." Adrian's jaw tightened. The name meant nothing to him at first, and then, slowly, it did. Marcus Whitfield had been a mid-level engineer at Cole Industries 15 years ago, back when Adrian's father still ran the company. Whitfield had been quietly, unfairly pushed out during a cost-cutting restructuring, his pension gutted, his reputation quietly tarnished by rumors his own superiors had planted to justify the firing. He had died 3 years later, broken-hearted and broke, according to the file, from a heart condition that worsened under financial stress. "She's the daughter of a man my father destroyed," Adrian said slowly, something cold crawling up his spine. "There's no evidence she took this job to seek revenge, if that's what you're thinking," Richard said carefully. "In fact, quite the opposite. Her employment application doesn't mention the connection at all. She used her married name, and the reference check nearly missed it entirely. If anything, Adrian, it looks like she went out of her way to hide it. Whether out of shame, or fear you'd fire her the moment you found out who her father was, I couldn't say." Adrian sat in silence, his mind a storm. For months, he had been so consumed with testing Melissa's loyalty, so certain the greatest danger in his life was a fiancée circling him like a shark scenting blood, that he had completely failed to consider the quiet woman in the gray uniform who mopped his floors every day might be carrying pain of her own, pain that led directly back to his own family's boardroom decisions. And yet, in 11 weeks of working in his home, Sarah Bennett had never once mentioned it. Never once looked at him with anything but exhausted, careful politeness. Never once asked for anything beyond the wage she'd agreed to. If she harbored resentment, she buried it so deep that even a man testing everyone around him for deception had never once suspected her. "What do you want to do?" Richard asked quietly. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "Nothing for now," he said finally. "Watch Melissa's legal maneuvering closely. And Richard, don't say a word to Sarah about what we know." "Not yet." That evening, something in Adrian shifted permanently. He found Sarah in the kitchen, scrubbing a pan with more force than the task required. Her shoulders tight with a particular exhaustion of a woman who had been running on empty for far too long. Lily sat at the small table nearby, coloring a picture with broken crayons, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Sarah," Adrian said gently, standing in the doorway, sunglasses in place. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah froze slightly, the way people who've been hurt too many times freeze whenever someone in power addresses them directly. "Of course, Mr. Cole. Are you happy here?" The question hung in the air, strange and unexpected. Sarah's hands stilled on the pan. She started, then stopped, clearly unsure how honest she was allowed to be with her employer. "I'm grateful for the work, sir." "That's not what I asked." Sarah set the pan down slowly, wiping her hands on a dish towel, buying herself time. When she finally looked up, forgetting for a moment that he was supposed to be unable to see the look on her face, there was something raw and unguarded in her eyes. "No," she admitted quietly. "I'm not happy. I haven't been happy in a long time. But happy isn't really something people like me get to think about, Mr. Cole. We think about rent, about whether there's enough formula for the week. Happy is a luxury for people like—" She stopped herself abruptly, cheeks flushing, clearly biting back the end of that sentence. "People like me," Adrian finished for her quietly. Sarah didn't answer, which was answer enough. Adrian nodded slowly, something in his chest aching in a way he didn't fully understand. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't think I've been happy in a long time either. Money doesn't fix that particular problem, in case you were wondering." It was the most honest thing he'd said to another adult in 6 months. Sarah studied him for a long moment, and for just a fraction of a second Adrian was certain, absolutely certain, that she saw straight through his dark glasses to the truth underneath, the same way her daughter had. But she said nothing. She simply nodded, picked up the pan again, and returned to her work. It was Lily, from her seat at the table, who broke the silence, holding up her crayon drawing proudly. "Look, Mr. Adrian. I drawed you." Adrian crossed the kitchen and knelt down beside her chair, looking, genuinely looking, no longer performing, at the crude, colorful crayon drawing of a tall stick figure with a big lopsided smile, standing next to a smaller figure holding his hand. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in months. Lily beamed, then reached up and took his hand in her small one, the way she often did, swinging it gently. "I love you, Mr. Adrian," she said simply, the way 3-year-olds say things without any of the fear or complication adults attached to those words. Across the kitchen, Sarah's hands went still at the sink, her back rigid, clearly mortified. "Lily, honey, that's—" "It's all right," Adrian said quickly, his voice rough. "It's all right, Sarah." He looked down at the small hand wrapped around his fingers, and for the first time since the accident, since the lie, since the cold calculated test he'd built his entire life around, Adrian Cole felt something crack wide open in his chest. Something that had nothing to do with Melissa or money or revenge, and everything to do with the terrifying, overwhelming realization that this tiny, honest child and her exhausted, quietly grieving mother had become the only real thing in his entire artificial world. 3 weeks passed, and the walls Adrian had built around his life began closing in from every direction at once. Melissa's legal maneuvering accelerated. Richard Voss arrived one morning grim-faced, with news that she had officially filed paperwork with a family court judge requesting an emergency hearing to establish medical power of attorney, citing Adrian's deteriorating condition and his increasing reliance on domestic staff rather than professional care. A thinly veiled shot at Sarah, whom Melissa had grown to view with open suspicion during her increasingly rare visits. "She's moving fast," Richard warned. "If this hearing happens and you don't show up prepared to contest it, a judge could grant her provisional authority within days. Adrian, you need to decide right now how long you intend to keep playing blind." Adrian sat by the window of his study, the city stretched out gray and enormous below him, and felt, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely afraid. Not of losing money. He had more than he could ever spend. He was afraid of what the unveiling would do to the fragile, honest thing that had grown in his home over the past few weeks, the thing between himself and Lily, and though neither of them had said it aloud, between himself and Sarah. That evening, sitting in the living room long after Sarah had left for the night with Lily asleep against her shoulder, Adrian made a decision. He called Richard Voss and told him to prepare everything. Full financial disclosures. Medical records proving his sight had never been impaired. Public statement. He would end the lie himself on his own terms, before Melissa could use it to destroy him. But he needed one more day. One more day of the strange, fragile peace he'd found in his own home before the entire world came crashing back in. That final day arrived with a soft knock at his study door around noon. Lily stood in the doorway in her small yellow dress, clutching her stuffed rabbit, having wandered away from Sarah, who was folding laundry in the next room. "Mr. Adrian," Lily said, climbing up onto the couch beside him with the easy familiarity of a child who had claimed this space as partly her own. "Can I tell you a secret too?" Adrian, sunglasses still in place out of habit rather than necessity now, smiled softly. "Of course, sweetheart." Lily leaned close, cupping her small hand around his ear the way children do when they think they're being very serious and very quiet, though her whisper was, as always, not quiet at all. "My mommy cries," she whispered. "At night. When she thinks I'm sleeping. She cries and she says Daddy's name and she says sorry to a picture of a man." Adrian went very still. "What picture, sweetheart?" "In her purse," Lily whispered. "Old man. Mommy says he was her daddy. She says sorry she couldn't help him. She says sorry all the time." Adrian's chest tightened painfully. He thought of the file Richard had read to him weeks earlier. Marcus Whitfield, destroyed by a restructuring under Adrian's own father, dead of a stress-related heart condition. His daughter withdrawing from nursing school in her final semester to help care for him in his final months, a debt of medical bills that had likely followed her ever since. Sarah wasn't just carrying the weight of an absent husband and a fatherless toddler. She was carrying the weight of watching her own father broken by the very company whose heir now sat in this room, hiding behind sunglasses he didn't need. "Lily," Adrian said carefully, "does your mommy know you're telling me this?" Lily shook her head, suddenly looking uncertain, the way children do when they sense, too late, that a secret might have been the wrong kind to share. "Is it bad? Did I do bad?" "No, sweetheart," Adrian said quickly, pulling her gently into a hug, feeling her small heartbeat against his chest. "You didn't do anything bad. You never do anything bad." It was in that exact moment, Lily curled against his chest, her small arms wrapped around his neck, that the study door opened and Sarah walked in, laundry basket in hand, looking for her daughter. She froze in the doorway. Because for the first time in 11 weeks, Adrian Cole was not wearing his sunglasses. They had slipped, forgotten, onto the couch cushion beside them during the hug. And his eyes, his very obviously seeing, very obviously focused eyes, were looking directly, unmistakably at her. The laundry basket slipped from Sarah's hands, spilling folded towels across the floor. "You can see," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her face draining of color. "You've been able to see this whole time." The silence in that study stretched long and terrible. Sarah, Adrian said quickly, setting Lily gently down on the couch and standing, hands raised slightly, the way one approaches something wounded and ready to bolt. Please, let me explain. Explain. Sarah's voice cracked, disbelief and hurt colliding in her eyes. You've been watching me, watching all of us, for months. My daughter has been talking to you, hugging you, telling you her little 3-year-old secrets, and you've been, studying us? Was this some kind of game to you? Some kind of sick experiment? It started as something else entirely, Adrian said. His voice raw, stripped of every ounce of boardroom composure he'd built his life around. It had nothing to do with you, Sarah, not at first. I found out my fiancé was only marrying me for my money. I wanted to know who around me was real. I never expected. His voice broke slightly. I never expected you. Or Lily. I never expected this to become the realest thing in my entire life. Sarah shook her head, backing toward the door, torn between fury and the devastating vulnerability of a woman who had, despite every hardship life had thrown at her, allowed herself to feel something close to safe in this house, and had just learned that safety had been built on a lie. My father worked for your family, she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them, months of buried grief cracking open all at once. Marcus Whitfield. Does that name mean anything to you? Your father's company destroyed him. Took his pension, his reputation, everything he'd worked 30 years to build, and threw him away like garbage the moment he stopped being convenient. He died with nothing, Mr. Cole. Nothing except a daughter who had to drop out of nursing school to nurse him instead, because we couldn't afford proper care. Tears streamed freely down her face now. I took this job because I was desperate, not because I planned some kind of revenge. I never once mentioned it because I was terrified you'd fire me the second you found out whose daughter I was. And this whole time you already knew. You've known, and you let me stand here every day, ashamed and afraid, while you tested me like a lab rat. I know, Adrian said, his own eyes burning now, unhidden, unable to hide any more behind glass or lies. I know, and I am so sorry. Sorry for what my father did to yours. Sorry for the lie I told you and everyone else. But Sarah, in 11 weeks, you never once asked me for anything beyond an honest wage. You never once mentioned what my family took from yours, even though you had every right to throw it in my face. You worked, and you loved your daughter, and you were kind to a man you believed was broken and blind, expecting nothing in return. Do you understand what that means to someone who has spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who only want what's in his bank account? Sarah stood frozen, tears still falling, saying nothing. My fiancé is trying to have me declared legally incapacitated, Adrian continued, quieter now. She's trying to steal control of everything I own, using the very lie I created against me. Tomorrow I'm ending this. Publicly. Every newspaper, every camera will know the truth, that I was never blind, that it was a test, a mistake born out of grief and paranoia. My name will be dragged through every headline in this city as a liar and a manipulator. And honestly, Sarah, I deserve every bit of it. He knelt down slowly, not toward Sarah, but toward Lily, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide, frightened eyes, sensing without understanding that something important and painful was happening between the grown-ups she loved. But there is one thing in the middle of all of this that was never a lie, Adrian said softly, looking between mother and daughter. The way I feel in this house. The way your daughter took my hand that very first week and never once let go, even when the rest of the world was falling apart around me. Lily saw through my lie in about 10 seconds, Sarah. She's the only honest thing that's happened to me in years. Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand, still trembling, still hurt, but something in her posture had softened, just slightly, at the sight of Adrian kneeling on the floor of his own study, no longer the untouchable billionaire, simply a man who had made a terrible mistake and was finally, fully owning it. I need time, she said finally, quietly. I need time to think about whether I can trust you again. Whether Lily should keep her voice caught. Keep loving someone who might disappear from her life the second the cameras show up. Take all the time you need, Adrian said. I'm not going anywhere. And whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the headlines say, Lily can keep her secret safe. I'll never ask either of you to pretend to be something you're not. Not ever again. The next morning, Adrian Cole stood in front of a room full of cameras and removed his sunglasses for the entire world to see, admitting the truth about his sight, his broken engagement, and the test that had cost him nearly everything, except, as it turned out, the one thing that actually mattered. Melissa's legal case collapsed within hours, her own recorded phone calls surfacing publicly through Richard Voss's careful legal maneuvering, revealing exactly what she had been after all along. 6 months later, Adrian Cole was no longer the coldest man in the business world. He was simply a man sitting on a park bench on a Sunday afternoon, sunglasses pushed up into his hair rather than hiding his eyes, watching a small girl chase pigeons across the grass while her mother laughed beside him. Really laughed, for what Sarah said was the first time in years. Lily ran back, breathless, and climbed straight into Adrian's lap the way she always did, wrapping her small arms around his neck. I love you, Mr. Adrian, she said again. The same 3 words that had once shattered his carefully built lie and, in the end, had given him back the only truth that had ever really mattered. I love you too, Lily, Adrian whispered back, and meant every single word. And that, friends, is the story of a billionaire who built a lie to protect his heart, and was saved by the one person too young and too honest to understand what a lie even was. Sometimes the truth doesn't come from lawyers, or headlines, or boardrooms. Sometimes it comes from a 3-year-old's whisper and a small hand refusing to let go. If this story touched your heart even a little bit, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what part moved you the most. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, because we've got so many more stories like this one coming your way. Thank you for watching till the very end. I'll see you in the next story.